Hi, everyone. It's Thursday, October 17th, 2018 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Higher Ed Live Special Edition. I'm your host, Erin Spinka, and on today's live broadcast, we're recapping what happened at this year's Social Media Strategy Summit, Higher Education Edition in New York City. I'm super excited for this episode because I was unable to make it this year, and the agenda looked amazing. We'll dive more into that later. But for now, Higher Ed Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. Our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. You can be a part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge and participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using hashtag HigherEdLive. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or you can take it with you on the road by subscribing to our podcast, which is also free. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. You're on your way to becoming a mapping expert. You've got the tools, but now it's time to put them into action. When you understand what information your target audience is looking for, when they're looking for it, how they're searching, and why, you're able to identify areas for improvement in engagement, content creation, and so much more. Enter M. Stoner's Experience Map Workshop. They'll teach your team how to use experience mapping methodology to improve your marketing and communications, and you'll receive a customized experience map. Once you empathize with their experiences, you can create and deploy content to enrich their user journey. We'll be tweeting out a link to that on the Higher Ed Live Twitter account in just a few seconds. And today I'm excited to welcome our guest. I'm joined by Social Media Strategy Summit producer and VP of Conference Productions, that is a mouthful, Brianna Jacobs, and two of the speakers from the event, Krista Barron and Jason Boucher. Boucher. Yeah. Krista is the Director of Social Media in the Division of Marketing and Communications at Texas A&M University. She works to curate the digital presence of the university to grow the brand and provide strategic direction for the university's social media program. Jason is actually right down the street from me a few hours at UNH, where he oversees the entire college's social media program, working closely with the communications and public affairs to grow audiences and invite participation from students, staff, faculty, alumni, prospective students, and the greater UNH community. You can follow what they're doing via the hashtag UNH Social. Just a reminder to our audience and people tuning in today, please don't hesitate to ask questions via the hashtag. Again, that's hashtag Higher Ed Live. I'm going to start off with some questions that we've prepared ahead of time, but again, I'm always happy to take your questions, so please tweet them at me. All right, so first of all, thank you all for joining me on this Wednesday afternoon. I know Jason and I are experiencing probably what I'd call peak foliage, right, in the New Hampshire woods?
Absolutely, it's beautiful out there.
Yep. And so I mentioned at a little bit earlier in the broadcast that I was unable to attend. Social Media Strategy Summit was actually on my list for this year, but it fell between a website launch and another conference I'm heading to next week. So the website launch definitely took priority. But for everyone here, what were some of the key takeaways? I know I love conferences because no matter how all over the place talks seem to be, when it comes down to the end, you realize there were these reoccurring themes or trends that kind of poked their way out of all the different sessions and panels.
I might defer to, I'm actually really interested to hear from Krista and Jason, what you guys thought the highlights of the event were, if you guys want to pitch in here.
I think one of the things I saw repeatedly, which was really refreshing, is that a lot of people are shifting away from they're shifting their view of social media to think more of social content and creating a content first strategy. That was something that I saw kind of across every single workshop or panel that I sat in on, was that people are, including higher ed and the larger brands, that we're really grateful to be able to see some of the stuff that they're doing as well. That people are really focusing on content strategy, which in higher education is not something that we've seen in the social sphere until probably the last couple of years or so, and to see it sort of universally happening is kind of cool. And also the implications of that are that people are reorganizing their teams to be better able to respond quickly, and not even to respond quickly, but to produce incredible, high caliber, really impactful content So what we're doing is not getting lost in the noise that happens in the social space. So that was something that I saw personally throughout everything that was really cool and got me really excited for what we're going to do in higher ed in the social space in the next couple years.
Yeah, I agree. I saw a lot of content calendar discussion about how to create, how to produce great content, and look at not just the day or the week, but the year, and look at different themes. How people could do less posts. It used to be all about, let me post every day and let me get in front of the most people I can and how many likes I can get. That's all kind of in the background now. It's gone. It's more about engaging with your audience and producing really top quality content and taking the time to brainstorm and come up with those ideas before posting. And I think that a lot more people are doing that. And I think that's great for higher ed and for, like you said, the larger brands that are doing that as well. It's just, we're taking our jobs more seriously, I think, now than 5 years ago when we first, were on social media. It was like, how can we just grow the likes on this page? And it's, what kind of metric is that? But now it's more about engagement and how many of these followers like what we're posting and are influenced and say, that looks like a place I like to attend and go to school. So it's more about marketing than it is just about the social posting.
I think this was actually a tweet. Maybe it was Tony with West Virginia University that tweeted after the event, and just how he just felt, reinvigorated and inspired by how the just the shift in the role and just all the different opportunities that have grown just over the last couple of years, of where social, how big social can play a role in, actual strategy in terms of, reaching out to students and alumni and influencers and all of that. So I thought that was cool, that it's not just about, there are, I don't think being scrappy will ever go away, but that it's kind of shifted from just making it work, with one or two people, where seeing these teams grow and priority shift and, social and content, like you guys are saying, really taking priority for a lot of these colleges and universities. So that was really cool to see too.
That's a interesting kind of segue into my next point, because this was my next question. This was the first year that they combined higher ed and other industries. So Brandon, can you tell me a little bit behind that decision? And then I'm really interested in hearing how that kind of played out in the real life kind of coming together of where you had big brands like the O Network and other, kind of giants with higher ed, which has always been, the stereotype, at least. I'm not going to say it's true or not, that we're a little bit slower to embrace this type of content or the changing marketing communication strategies.
Yeah. So the Social Media Strategy Summit, I think it was launched in 2009, I believe, with GSMI, and then I've been running it since 2013. So that kind of corporate side social media event that's really focused on consumer brands has been around for a while. We actually do get a number of, a handful of marketers from universities coming to attend that event every year. And then the higher education event, I've done it standalone for, I guess it was 3 years before we brought them together. But I think one of the, and this is also just what we get feedback on too, that people who attend our event, they like to hear from, it's great to be able to talk to marketers that are in very similar roles as yourself and work for similar types of companies, but it's also just kind of refreshing to see, different industries are doing with social. Because I think, and getting creative as marketers are, there's ways that you can apply those strategies and even those case studies to what you're doing in higher education or vice versa. And so that was kind of the thought behind bringing those two programs together. And then, it was a series of panels on the higher education program, just so that attendees would hear from all these different types of colleges and universities, and just making sure that I had lots of different institutions represented, and they could hear all of those different perspectives. So the higher education attendees had access to all of those other consumer brand case studies. And I wasn't really sure actually if the higher education folks would kind of just, stick to their own track, and maybe a few would venture out to the, consumer consumer brand case studies, but which it did seem, I mean, that room was pretty packed for for most of the event. But Jason and Chris, I don't know if you guys headed out and checked out some of those other brand case studies.
Yeah, I did. I actually thought it was done really well. I don't know how you have the time to do all of this stuff at once. It's amazing. You're like a superhero, but yeah, you're running around constantly. There she goes again. You know,
yeah, I think I was doing like 5 or 6 miles a day, honestly.
I know. Each day, you know, but I was able to catch a few of the non-higher ed sessions, which I think, as a higher education marketer, I think it's good for us to see how corporations and large companies take on the role of social media at their companies. And I think I also noticed they have bigger budgets than I do too. So
yeah. Oh, sorry, Krista, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was, I also kind of hopped back and forth between the two. And it was kind of interesting because I feel like our end goals are completely different based on industry and higher education. But there's a lot of the same problems or same things that they're encountering, which was kind of refreshing to hear. So I think, oh gosh, I can't think of her name, but from Grubhub, they're a brand that I have long admired what they have done on social media. They're very creative. And she said what I think was like a rallying cry for the entire conference, which was, you know, you want to be scrappy, not crappy, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel that deep down. That's like the truest thing that anyone's ever said, right? Because that's what we have to do in higher ed, especially when you have no budget or very minimal budget for social media, and you're looking at some of these companies that, you know, you think have just a, you know, blank checkbook that they're throwing money at stuff. And so it's interesting to hear that they're also having to think on their feet a lot, which I feel like is sort of like a higher ed mantra, you know, do more with less.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool to see that other folks are feeling that way too.
Yeah, and I'll say too, even on that, you know, the corporate side, consumer brand side, I mean, we do get a lot of feedback on that too from people who are like, you know, that say this is awesome to hear from these, you know, big brands, but how, and that's something I try to make sure that the big brands can do too, you know, with the Oprah Winfrey Network. I was like, you guys are doing such amazing things, but how can we, which I think he did a really good job of, was sort of tying it back to some key things that these, you know, smaller companies or people that don't have those massive budgets can do to sort of see, you know, maybe not necessarily the super large scale results that a brand like, you know, Oprah would see, but that, you know, be able to tie it back to teams that are working with budgets. So I think that's kind of, you know, across the board. And so we try to make the content relevant in that way. But I think the speakers did a good job of, you know, yeah, scrappy, not crappy, like you're saying.
Brandon, did any of the other folks come over to the higher ed sessions at all? Did you hear anybody come to our side for a panel or anything?
I'm actually not sure. That would be a good, interested to find out. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure, but that would be interesting to know too. Yeah, to see if the brands came over too. But we had, you know, there were universities that signed up just for the the corporate event that may not have known that the higher education event was happening. And so when they saw those sessions, maybe they were just pleasantly surprised. They're like, oh, I get access to all this stuff too. But yeah, I should find a way to see what the actual crossover is. But it seemed to me, you know, that people were, you know, that both sides were mingling and networking and stuff too. So that was cool to see.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's kind of nice to peek behind the curtain because, I mean, as an audience member of a lot of these bigger brands, and even in higher ed too, you sit there and you think like, oh, they have to have lots of money, or like, I can't even dream of doing that because there's so many moving pieces here. And, you know, I'm a team of one or a team of two or whatever. And so with the bigger brands, I'm interested with like, I guess my question is, were you surprised at how similar their situations were to, maybe our own experiences in higher ed, or was it still kind of like, okay, yes, they have a lot of team, but here are the pieces that I can take back to my institution back home?
I think like, to me, some of the budget stuff came out a little bit. Like I could see a really big difference there, because there were very clear times where you would look at somebody like the guy, I think I went to the panel who talked about the Aperol Spritz campaign, and he's a very small team, but as he was talking, he just referenced like all the agencies they work with, and they have this beautiful, beautiful, consistent imagery and campaign, and just incredible. And so it's like, okay, so you're a small team, but you also have that money behind you. But then I think like a lot of the things that I could see, some of the stuff that I will explain or report on to our senior administration, they're having to do the same thing to the C-suite a lot of times. So a lot of what they were talking about, the KPIs they're looking at, the things that they know the CEO is going to like versus what they know is really going to be more effective in their day-to-day was interesting, because I could see a lot of that as well. And then I also think just their approach, we're incredibly similar, I think, both in higher ed and then in consumer brands with how we're approaching and how we're strategizing with what we're putting out content wise. It's just a completely different end goal, right? Like they're trying to sell more product or get more customers or whatever, and we're essentially trying to create this brand experience and this university experience that lives in the digital space. And so completely different end goals, but our strategy and the way we're approaching things are very similar. And I think, Erin, to get back to what you said earlier, people always don't think of higher ed as being like on the ball with stuff, right? Like we're traditionally these slow adapters. And that was really cool for me to see and made me like proud to be like a higher ed communicator, is because we're like, hey, some of these guys are talking about stuff that they've just done. And I know, my colleagues across the country that have been doing this for, 3-4 years. And that was fun too. I think they could probably also come over to the higher ed side and learn a little bit from us as well. But yeah, it was really fun for me to see the similarities, but then also there were definitely some big differences as well.
Yeah, I think another similarity is looking at competitors. I don't know if you saw the morning panel where you mentioned Grubhub, Kohl's and Peloton were on that panel as well. And I believe it was the woman from Peloton who said that to her staff, go out. If you see other gyms and what they're doing, let me know. Bring it back to us. How can we do things better? Or what are other people doing? And in higher ed, we, with our software and our social listening, we look at competitors and see what they're doing. And we are always asking our student interns more than employees, what do you see at other schools that you like, or what are we doing well? What can we improve on? And, the difference is just resources, I believe. We have more student interns where they have more employees. So
what I like too about what I just saw just in the higher education marketing community, and it's not to say that the consumer brand side isn't like this, but I think with you guys particularly, there's such a sense of openness that you guys are all willing to share. And just kind of going off of that, looking to your competitors, but you guys are still all willing to share, what you guys are working on and best practices and knowing what's working and wanting to share that with the rest of the community so that they can also, be doing awesome things. So I think it was on the panel with talking about KPIs where it was Mike with Harvard and then Joseph with Yale. And I'm not remembering who else was on the panel now, but I think Joseph made that point of, of looking at your competitors, and he kind of goes like this, looking at your competitors. I mean, it's, Mike with Harvard saying that, but I just think it's cool that no matter what, that you guys are still open to sharing those ideas and just for the greater good of the higher education community, making sure that everyone can grow and do awesome things on social. So I noticed that too at this event, which I think is really awesome.
And I think to kind of piggyback off of that, that's something that, and I might be kind of getting ahead and where we're headed with this, but something I've really enjoyed about this conference is getting to meet some of those folks in person that I have admired what they're doing on social, and knowing that within the higher ed community, we're very willing to help each other, right? There's very much a team mentality within our community. And so, last year I had met, you mentioned Tony from West Virginia. I had met him at the conference, talked to him briefly. but I knew they were doing some incredible stuff on YouTube. And I, tweeted him and I was like, I want to talk to you. Do you have an hour on the phone? And we spent, hour and a half, 2 hours on the phone going through all this kind of stuff. And he was just like an open book and with stuff that I was asking. And that's really cool, and something I really like about working in higher education. And something that's been a great benefit to this conference is the stuff that you're admiring or you want to know. How are you doing this? How are you able to do it? And people are like, you can do it too. Let me show you how. And that's really cool.
It is cool. I think, that's one of the best parts about the whole conference, I think, is not just meeting new people, but catching up with our counterparts at other institutions that we've seen each year, whether it's at SMSS or other conferences. We get together and network, share stories, bounce ideas off each other. And one of the best parts was, Thursday night I was supposed to go to a concert out in Brooklyn, and I realized that it was a rainy night. Uber was at like 2 times the
oh no,
it was like $90 to get to this concert, which was more than I paid for the ticket.
Oh my gosh.
So I went on Ticketmaster, sold a ticket, and I ended up having dinner with Liz at Notre Dame and Nikki from Michigan and
awesome.
And Jamie at Georgia. And the 4 of us just went to Italy in Midtown. I had dinner and we got to share stories, good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
It was great to have that connection and just talk about what's going on at each other's schools and how we can help each other. So,
that's awesome. It was a blessing in disguise then that the concert didn't work out.
I was going to say, I don't know if it's because we're in education, so we feel like maybe there's a natural bit of an educator within all of not within all, but, in higher ed communicators, just in general, of wanting to share how you do something. Again, you're not going to necessarily give away every secret that you've ever come up with, but I mean, a Google spreadsheet with formulas that you use for an analytics spread report or something like that is simple, and why kind of protect it to yourself when it can really help a team somewhere else with figuring out how they're doing analytics? Because while analytics provide you insight on how to make your stuff better, it's not necessarily going to make or break competition. And the other thing that I think is pretty interesting about it, and I'm interested because the one thing that I like about the Strategy Summit conference is that there's a lot of panels versus one-on-one presentations, is that higher ed is very much about community managing and building, whereas big brands and other industries, there's less, I think, focus on that community. Now we're seeing that kind of catch up, but always higher ed has been about developing that community with your alumni network, kind of transforming a digital experience to feel similar to what they might have on campus or, in the college years. Prospective students kind of get a feel what it would like to be on a college campus. So community has always been a big part of higher ed communicating, in my opinion. And what I like about the social media strategies, and I'd like to kind of pick your brains a little bit with the panels, how does that bring in seems like a really great way to get free flowing conversation? And did you see that at this conference? What kind of opens up whenever you have a panel versus just a person talking behind a podium?
Well, I originally, to be honest, I've kind of, in past events, I've usually shy away from panels because sometimes they can be a little, if you don't have the right mix of personalities on stage, sometimes it can be a little tough to get that conversation going. But, and Jason and Chris, you can chime on this too and let me know what you think. But for these panels, I focused on at least part of the session on case studies. So, each speaker would have a chance to sort of highlight in relation to the topic, something that they've done recently at their university that really showcased their strategy in this, that particular area, which I think worked well. But I was just really pleasantly surprised with how well they went. I think they were very informative, at least the sessions that I was able to sit in on. It just felt, I think the conversation did work well. And I think, Aaron, that's a really good point, that just based on that feeling of community, and they, that higher education marketers love having those conversations with each other about ideas that they can share and stuff like that, that probably caters well to having the format like that at this event. So it did, I think it worked out well, but I'm, Jason and Krista, I'm interested to hear what you guys think too.
Yeah. So my panel was was kind of cool. I personally think was cool. But it was about crisis communication and how you kind of work that into your social media strategy. And so what was cool about our conversation was I represent like the giant, massive state school. I was on a panel with University of Houston, Sean from University of Houston, which is our neighbor down the road, much smaller, but kind of a city within a city. And then Brian, and I'm blanking on, a smaller college up in New York State. And it was really cool for me to sit and just listen to our conversation, because we have completely different audiences in the sense of how we have to communicate things, if that makes sense. But a lot of the issues that they're planning around in terms of crisis communication were exactly the same. Brian was talking about weather is probably one of the most critical things that he has to communicate with and use in social media all the time, because they have these crazy winters. And in my sense, I mean, I'm in Texas. If it snows or ices or anything, I mean, the whole state shuts down. But yesterday we had a ton of rain. We had some flooding in other parts of the state, and our students, of course it's raining and they want us to close campus for them. And so we're dealing with a lot of like one-on-one weather issues. And then later in the day, we had some buildings that were kind of having some, roof leaks and things like that, and stuff that we're dealing with on sort of a case-by-case basis. But I thought often too, that's something that, what I would think is a little school up in New York State is also kind of dealing with. And the other interesting thing that I found, and this is just something I found on my panel, but then also could kind of see people doing on other panels as well, is that a lot of times you're having the same experience, but you're experiencing it differently, which I know sounds kind of counterintuitive, but in my personal experience, Sean talked a lot about Hurricane Harvey and the University of Houston's crisis response plan and emergency communication plan during Hurricane Harvey. We too had that up in College Station, but we were not dealing with near the type of devastation that they were dealing with down in Houston. We were dealing more with logistical things, and they're worrying, if their campus is going to take on water, which is insane. So hearing her talk about putting their emergency communication plan into place with how they were experiencing the event versus how we were doing the same thing but experiencing the event completely differently was really kind of fascinating. And I saw that a lot too. I thought that was really cool, just to see how a lot of times you're saying, crisis communication or whatever we're doing is a go, but the actual implementation of it is so unique to that institution.
Yeah, I think the panels are great. I like that idea because it gives more voices to more colleges and universities can participate, I believe, having 2 or 3 or 4. And my panel was wonderful, but the only problem was we ran out of time. We thought, I forget his name, it's Michael, I believe, was our from William & Mary, and he had a list of 10 questions to get to. We got to 3. Because we had a great conversation on stage between each other, and we had questions from the audience. So, I mean, that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing that we ran out of time. It's just that, it went by so quick because we were having fun. And I think that, having someone on stage from the Ivy League, from an SEC big school, and then me, who's like a medium school, it's great because it's like everybody's from a different kind of background. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know Brianna, a lot of times I noticed her during the higher ed stuff having to like run up and be like, cut it off. Like, I love where this is going. I love it. Everybody.
I had my little 10-minute, 5-minute signs. I tried to have it be more of a gentle nudge than.
It was nice.
But yeah, I mean, obviously that's great if there's not enough time for all the content that you guys want to get through. I know when planning, I'm like 45 minutes sounds like a solid time slot, but I bet these are just going to totally whiz by, and just with questions and stuff too. Yeah, it tends to go really quick when the conversation is just fun, but yeah, I did have to, I'm like, sorry guys, I know I just want to let this conversation just, run and go with it, but for scheduling sake.
Well, that was cool too, is I think you worked, or the conference works a lot of breaks and a lot of networking opportunities. So I had several people that either didn't get to ask a question or were interested in something else that we were doing and would kind of find our team and say like, hey, I'm, so-and-so, let's talk about this, or I want to know about this. So that was pretty cool. And then because of that, I met the social manager at Texas Tech University, which means that I think I know all of the social media managers now with all the big schools. So I was like, yes, like, I completed the challenge.
That's awesome.
Back to Jason's point about having so many voices featured because of the panels. So there are favorites in the higher ed space, I think. So, Nikki and Michigan stuff is always top of mind. Colorado State, Harvard, all these different schools that kind of you think to check to see what are they do, what's cool and happening. UNH, I think A&M, like all of you guys are some of the schools that people think to check on to see what's new, what's happening, what's trendy. What hidden gems or kind of new voices did you stumble upon at the conference? Because again, the panel let so many voices in. Who's doing something cool that maybe we haven't really talked about in the higher ed social media community that much yet?
I would say, I think John McBride at BYU and his coworkers had a very informative and amazing presentation on using Instagram story to help sexual assault victims. I thought it was very powerful. I thought it was something that I haven't seen that particular example before. And it's something that I believe that I'm going to share his slides with our SHARP office, which is Sexual Harassment Rate Prevention Program. And I think it's a great idea. It's a great way to get that message across. And I think that John and his team did a really excellent work with that. It was really cool to see. And that's one of the many things that stands up. But I'll let Krista talk about some of her highlights.
Yeah, so I think Texas Tech, and that's just because not just because I said them, but they're doing some really cool stuff in video. They have a video series that they showed called 23 Questions, which is kind of a play on the Vogue thing. And it was such a well done video that, they picked wonderful people to profile. It was executed in such a wonderful way. And it made me go back and look at all of their videos before, because I wanted to see different ways and different things of how they had done that. But I really thought that they're hitting some stuff out of the park, for sure. And I know I admired the heck out of what they were able to produce with that too. And it was so authentic, like it wasn't overly produced, which is why I think it really resonated with me. It was genuinely focused on genuine people who love the university and just executed in a really phenomenal way.
I'm literally taking notes. Please, more. Who else should I research?
This is like not related to a specific speaker highlight, but I thought that I just remember sitting in on that part of the conversation. Maybe it was on the video panel. And I think part of the content panel too, which of thinking of like what level of production is appropriate for the piece of content that you're putting out. It's just not something that I had thought about before, but I remember there was just, that was a big part of the conversation of, shooting with your iPhone versus having something that's super highly produced and can come off as overdone, or for the different types of video campaigns that some of these universities were putting on. So I just wanted to mention that. I just thought it was very interesting that was part of the video conversation. And I recognize now that it probably is important that the style of the content needs to be appropriate for the message that it's conveying. But I just thought that was interesting too. There was some conversation around that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's something I think, similarly to at this conference, kind of that changing tide of not just thinking about, some of the vanity metrics and like kind of the basics of social and digital engagement, but kind of finally digging into the marketing side when it comes to higher ed. Content treatment is what I've deemed it, is really a increasingly talked about point whenever I'm discussing anything with my higher ed colleagues, is how do we treat this story? Is it a story that deserves Facebook, Twitter, Instagram stories, live feed, or is it just a written piece with a really well-produced video that then we chop up trailers from? And so I think that content treatment is something I'm keeping my eye on over this next year of conferences, because that really feels, especially with small teams, having that kind of discussion at the beginning, and instead of kind of halfway through or at the end realizing, oh, we need this supporting element for here and this and that, it's going to be, I think, a hot.
So I will tell you someone else to look into for that. Liz at Notre Dame. Notre Dame has an entire strategic content division that they have built out within their marketing communication structure. And I literally, when Liz was presenting that, I'm like texting people in my office. And I'm like, this is how we need to be doing things and how we need to be approaching things. But it's exactly what you're getting at, Erin, is that content treatment, right? Like, you have this really great story. Do you invest the time to, build out a whole web page on it? Do you create a video about it? How does that get sliced and diced? And Notre Dame is really doing some very cool stuff in that space.
I don't remember if I saw them on the attendee or the panel list for this year, but I actually saw something similar from Northwestern. So Amy Burkhart presented this incredible slide, which spam her to see if she'll send you the presentation, because I just took a picture and like have saved it for forever. And it's this incredible kind of walkthrough strategic mapping of what to do. Like you identify the story, and then you identify where it falls on this hierarchy of small story, big story, I'm blanking on experiential story or something along those lines. And then that determines the treatment. So it's this really cool like roadmap that you can follow, like almost like a choose your own adventure. Well, okay, what's your story idea? Now, is it this or this? And you're like, oh, well, it's this way. So now I'm going to go that way. It's one of those things where like I took a picture, and like everyone that I could find, I was like, look at this. We need this today. Like, forget everything else. It was brilliant. But I'm really interested to see, as more, again, that strategy kind of leaks into higher ed and the communicators, because maybe we finally have time or enough resources to be thinking about that strategy, if we'll see more of that, because I'm really interested to see how that scales to different institutions in the higher ed space. We have a little bit of time left, so I wanted to give an opportunity to figure out, so this Social Media Strategy Summit has passed. What are some of the upcoming conferences or opportunities that everyone on the show today is looking forward to going to? Where should we be tuning in to hear from our colleagues next? And how do I get involved for next year?
Okay, I'm so sorry. My internet just cut out right as you asked the question. Can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
Go again. Just curious, where is everyone headed to next in the professional development conference field? And how do we get involved with social media strategies for the next either higher ed space or larger industry conference in the upcoming year / next couple months?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly speak to our calendar next year, and if there's any other events that Jason and Krista want to mention that they're involved with too. But so we're going to have the higher education. I'm doing the same setup as we did this year of having the higher education panels and then access to those consumer brand sessions. We're going to be in October in New York again. So we're working on finalizing those dates, but we also have just our regular social media strategy summit, consumer brand focused in Anaheim in March, and then also in Chicago in April. So we running this event 3 times a year. So that's kind of what's coming up for us. And there's just online, I mean, if you go to the homepage, socialmediastrategysummit.com, there's a contact us where you can find my information, and then also just an apply to speak section where you can send in case studies or topic ideas. But yeah, so that's how to apply to speak. But it's been, at least with the higher education community, it's so cool that I've just met a lot of these speakers or through your guys' recommendations. I think, Jason, was it you that had mentioned, it was either you or Joel, or maybe it was both of you, Joel Renner, who mentioned reaching out to Erin for one of the panels that I was putting together. So it's just really cool that you guys are like, who's great. And I just meet so many of you guys that way, which is awesome. But I just wanted to mention that too. You guys are really awesome about getting me connected with the other marketers in the in the space.
I will say that I recommend people all the time because I want to hear from them. So like, I'm always like, hey, you know who's doing something great? You really need to get Aaron Lee Baker from Harvard, the analytics guy, because he's doing cool stuff. And then I'm also like, keep it down because I really want to hear what they're doing. I need to know how they have an analytics dedicated human being. Like,
yeah. That's awesome.
But where, Jason and Krista, what's on your schedule for the rest of the year or coming into next?
So the next one we have planned, which we're kind of lucky in this regard, but South by Southwest is right down the road from us, which is not higher ed specific. There's a EDU part that goes before the main interactive conference, but Texas A&M does a big kind of brand activation at South by Southwest every year, and so we get to go to a lot of stuff at a lot of the interactive conference, which is really cool. I've seen a few higher education folks in that space, but it's really great for industry and then folks from the actual tech companies themselves. So, actually getting to ask the Snapchat guy why Snapchat's doing whatever it's doing that day is kind of
a giant pain.
Yeah, like why explain this? So that's kind of next for us. I've seen a couple of things that look kind of interesting to me. I don't know if we'll be able to pull the trigger and go, but there's a conference that I think Case is putting on about social media. It's sometime in April up in Oregon. That looks kind of cool.
Plus, it's in Oregon.
So yeah, Oregon, right? Might be a little too close to South by for us, but that was one that I think that had definitely popped up on my radar too.
For me, the next thing is Case District 1, which is in March in Boston. So not too far. I can just take the bus, which is nice. We used to go to South by Southwest. We actually had a booth, the trade show, for a few years. And then I noticed that, Michigan and Texas A&M kind of blew us out of the water. We're not doing that one anymore. But then the other one is July 29th through the 31st in Philadelphia. I'm going to be chairing the web and mobile track for EduWeb, whatever you want to say it. It's Hilton at Penn's Landing in Philadelphia over the summer, July 29th.
Cool. Well, I just make a list, and if people haven't joined it yet, there's a great back channel, hashtag HESM on Twitter, and then also kind of a corresponding Slack and Facebook group. And there's a conference feed. And so people are always asking for, where are people headed? And we see a lot of the same ones cycle through. So I'm always looking for new ones. And I'm always excited to see the ones that I'm familiar with, the strategies, EduWeb, Case SMC pop up, but it's always good to hear what's up and coming. And that's our time for today. I do want to let the audience know that I did tweet out links to free resources, some email registration links so that you can register to get updates from Social Media Strategy Summit so that you can be prepared for next year and put it on your calendar now so that you're ready to go for next year. I want to thank our program sponsors, as always, M. Stoner for helping us put the show on, our guests for joining us, and our viewers, as always, for tuning in and spending a part of their afternoon with me. See you all next time.
Yeah. See you guys in October, right, of next year in New York.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Take
care.